what does it mean to be a Christian now who is struggling to try to reconcile the Sermon on the Mount with very hostile times, not just inside the church, but outside the church?
This is the No BS Bishop podcast. We're alive to love, and all other values are potential BS. Now here's your host, Bishop Randy Dean.
Well, hello, everybody. I am Bishop Randy Dean, and my moniker is the No BS Bishop. And so BS in that regard is what you think it is.
Yes.
But it's also bait and switch, which in my nomenclature, the white evangelical church has used bait and switch rather effectively. So anyway, hi, everybody. Welcome to this podcast. One of the reasons I do this is just for this kind of reason, to have a conversation that we are not accustomed to having. But they are also conversations that might just save us from our precipitous decline. Here's the decline. In the last 25 years, evangelicalism has declined by 40 to 45 million people. You don't hear that number, but it's out there. It's been largely studied by a variety of other people, much more inclined to be statistically inclined than me. But it also means that every decade, for the last decade, 4,000 to 7,000 churches have shuttered. So this is the decline that I like to call being blindsided by a snail, and now it's catching us. And I'm happy to speak to it from my vantage point. I'm delighted to hear from you and your vantage point. Oh, by the way, this is Selika Ducksworth-Lawton. And I'll let her tell you what she does around here in Eau Claire. But in my world, I've spent 50 years as an evangelical pastor. I moved away from that, not geographically, but philosophically and otherwise. So I feel like I've got a unique perspective. And to that end, I want to leave a legacy for those that are inclined to talk about Randy Dean, because legacy usually shows up 10, 15 years after you're gone. And so this is my digital legacy. So I want to move on. Let's get right to the topic du jour here today. Selika, would you introduce yourself to those folks that are listening and watching here?
Thank you. I am Selika Ducksworth-Lawton. I am a historian at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, although none of the opinions or the information I'll be talking about today reflects the university. The university is a separate entity. I have been various things out in the community. I've been the president. I'm the past president of Uniting Bridges. I am a state board member for the ACLU of Wisconsin right now. I am a Roman Catholic by birth.
I love it.
Lifelong Roman Catholic. I am from Slidell, Louisiana, right across the lake from New Orleans. I've lived in both places.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. A good old-fashioned Creole.
Yeah.
And I've been in Eau Claire in various ways, trying to help the community since 1993.
Okay.
I am a military and civil rights historian. And I guess that's the thing. I come from a family where we've always been community-minded and tried to help the community. My dad, during the civil rights movement, made a deal with the police because he was a coach. And when the kids would go and sit in at Sorales, they'd give them 2 hours and the police wouldn't beat them. And then he and Mr. Brooks, the principal from the black high school, then St. Tammany, would go and bring them home.
Wow.
So integration in Slidell didn't have the violence that its neighbor just 50 miles up the way, Bogalusa, did with the Deacons for Defense and Justice, where really 1965 to 68, we came the closest to race war in this country. And my mother has always worked towards peace and justice as a musician. first as a public school music teacher and then as the first female chair of her music department at Southern University in New Orleans. So I come from this family and there are expectations, but I'm also that child who always asked why. I was a problem child. So I'm very excited and honored to talk to Bishop Randy, especially about not just the interfaith, but the intersections of the civil rights movement then and now.
Yes.
With faith, because it was very much when secular and sacred came together to save the country. Then they would have said from communism, but it was also very much about what it meant to be a Christian in those challenging times. And what does it mean to be a Christian now who is struggling to try to reconcile the Sermon on the Mount with very hostile times, not just inside the church, but outside the church. The divisions, and as a historian, the divisions look very much like the 1950s. They look very much like the business worship of the 1920s.
Right.
And they look very much like how the crisis of masculinity in 1900 intersected with religion and the ideas of civil rights and freedoms to create crisis. So I wanted to be able to talk to you. I've admired your Facebook posts, and I thank Scott Morfitt for putting us together. And now I'll shut up and if you start saying stuff.
I'm just savoring everything you're saying there. You've got such a rich heritage. And by the way, Scott Morfitt is my instigator, chief engineer, navigator of this podcast, and my hat's off everything he's doing. And Scott did pave the way for this conversation. But I like to call what you just discussed in some terms of having full adult conversations, which is what we're attempting to do here and what I'm attempting to do through this podcast, to have some adult conversations about the things that are damning much of the faith in America. And one of them is race relationships and the connection of faith and race, LGBTQ, women. We just have not had those conversations on any length of real significance. So this is why this is rich for me, because I'm poking that bear. All of those bears I'm poking. This herd of bears. I said, I want to talk about not just the elephant in the room, but the herd of elephants that are in our room.
Yes.
And honestly, I see the decline, especially in my circle of life, of the evangelical church as a prophetic word. It's not so much God slapping anybody upside the head. It's just the natural decline of the failure to have adult conversations where we honestly discuss what we are here to be or not to be. And I think Jesus started that conversation in the Sermon on the Mount. You mentioned that. So let's go there.
I think it's hard for people to listen today. They listen to one-up someone. They don't listen to understand. They don't ask why. They're not looking for common humanity. They see conversation as battle.
Right.
Whereas all of my life, I think I've seen, at least, especially with religion, especially with civil rights, how do we find the common cause? How do we find the common humanity? And maybe that's because I'm a Black Catholic. And in Slidell, in a segregated neighborhood, being a Black Catholic's a lonely experience because there's very few of us. We're 0.5% of African-American religious. And in the Catholic Church, again, we're about 1 to 1.5%. in the country, we are outnumbered by white and especially emerging Latino and Asian Catholics. So while in Louisiana, we were a plurality, there's enough to have our own churches.
Was there?
And
Really?
especially in New Orleans,
Oh, sure.
Our Lady of Guadalupe, the International Shrine of St. Jude, which is where my mom was an organist, was always integrated. And people would come there to look for miracles. So there was very much it's not about race, it's about we're all in need. And I came from a missionary church in part of the Orleans Diocese, but in Slidell. So I helped to integrate my Catholic school in that. So I'm used to that idea that you need to listen.
I grew up in Milwaukee on the north side, Fond du Lac Avenue, 27th Street. For those of you that are interested, look it up. And I became acquainted with a civil rights worker there, a white priest, Catholic priest, Father Grappi. You heard that name?
We teach a lot about Father Grappi up here. I have brought his hate mail in for the students to see because, they're going, well, how does a white Italian priest lead the Black Power movement in Milwaukee, lead the youth command?
That is tattooed in my memory as a kid watching this drama.
And see, I had Irish priests in New Orleans, especially Father Dindel would come over every summer and he would talk about the troubles in Northern Ireland. And for the Catholics of my generation, we could see the racialization of Irish Catholic and that treatment and the treatment of us.
Okay.
So, I mean, you look at this British history of divide and conquer, and it's really Irish Catholics, especially if you go to places like Derby today, feel that connection to the empire and to the treatment. You'll see murals with Martin Luther King. You'll see murals with Mandela, murals with Biko next to Irish martyrs. And the irony is while Irish here who were Protestants came over to be slave owners, Irish Catholics were discriminated against.
Right.
And in New Orleans, the Irish Catholics were limited to an area called Backyards and Irish Bayou. The joke is if they could have put the Irish in the lake, they would have, because Irish Bayou is in the Wrigley's. When you're coming across I-10 towards going west, it is the swamps. As you come off of the lake. The sad part is that the Catholic Church in America did not allow Catholic nuns and priests to march until Selma. But when the Catholics came in, we came in with a bang. Father Grappi was there 1963, long before any of this stuff was happening, helping to integrate. He was a part of trying to calm things down after the 1967 riots. You have the priests and nuns, as I said, in Selma. The attempts at integration in New York at Ocean Hill, Brown Hill were also led by priests. But that goes back to a history of priests in Louisiana and Latin America being the ones who spoke for the poor. The biggest slave revolt in the United States is the St. James River Rebellion, led by a white Irish Catholic priest in New Orleans.
My studies.
They actually are outside Baton Rouge and they're marching down the Mississippi River towards New Orleans, and it took the entire Louisiana militia to stop it. But that is the power of faith.
Yes.
And almost every slave revolt in America had a person of faith leading it, whether they were Catholic, Protestant, etc. And we forget to talk about that. So I've lived this life where I've either been in a plurality in Louisiana or I've been a minority in Ohio. And here I've been in this interesting space because my culture is Catholic and it
Yeah.
allows me to make common cause with Catholics and Lutherans, but my culture is also Black. So there are times that they look at me cockeyed and I look at them cockeyed. Like, we're not going to talk about which Our Father we sing. Because
Okay.
the Our Father y'all sing up here is not the one I'm used to.
I bet.
And when I said the one I'm used to, they're like, we only sing that at funerals.
Oh my.
But I think that this culture helps me to be a part of what I think it's more who talks about the church remnant versus the church regnant.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets to that entire idea of religion in crisis today.
Yes.
You have this division where you have churches, and it doesn't matter which sect they are. You have churches that are in monocultural areas.
Mm-hmm.
A monocultural area would be someplace like Eau Claire, where you're looking at minorities. Minorities are 9% of the population.
Oh, it's that high. I wouldn't have expected that high.
Well, that's because of Latino and Hmong.
Oh, okay. Okay, sure.
If you're looking at Black people, if
Right.
they had in the jail were 1 point something according to last census,
Okay.
take
yeah.
them out of the jail, it's 0.73.
Okay. Wow.
And that includes the students at the university.
Oh.
So it gets
Oh.
worse. I used to joke you could put
Oh,
all of us in my house, drop a bomb, and get rid of the entire population here.
Oh.
So this is a monoculture. And in monocultures, especially if that is a mono-religious culture as well,
Mhm.
where they're the vast majority, it's really easy for a religious entity to think everybody should be like them. They should be the standard. Everyone should assimilate into theirs. And that, as the article I had sent you
Mhm.
talked about, that this is for their own good, that you want to see them in heaven, and that it's enough to just evangelize them, to proselytize them.
Right.
There's a saying I've always loved from St. Francis de Assisi, and it is, I'm paraphrasing it, preach the gospel always, but rarely use words.
Exactly. When necessary.
Only when necessary. And in that regnant, they see church as empire.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we talk about the Puritans, but it goes all the way back to Constantine.
Right.
When he takes Christianity and moves it from an attack on materialism, an attack on the cultures of elites, when he's saying it's as hard for a rich man to go through the eye, to go into heaven as it is for a rope to go through the eye of a needle. And Constantine in 327 turns it into a religion
Right.
that would support empire. Because when you look at the Nicene Creed talks a lot, which comes also out of 900s, it's a lot about what I believe. But the Sermon on the Mount is, what should I do to be a Christian? Now, it's interesting that in the Mass, we recite the Nicene Creed. We don't recite the Sermon on the Mount. And priests and
So tell.
and ministers are getting pushback when they do talk about the Sermon on the Mount. The civil rights movement was the intersection of the Sermon on the Mount with race and with love, with country. That's why they keep talking about it as love. In those monotheistic cultures, it's easy to talk about what I believe. That's performative. I can do that. I'll
Right.
get a lot of good.
Score
People will be
points.
happy. It's very divisive in some ways to talk about what do I do and where does tolerance fit in there. And then you have this different church. And this is the church really in some ways that the Sermon on the Mount came out of, that Jesus came out of,
Mhm.
that multicultural Roman Empire.
Mhm.
Well, the church regnant is in many ways the urban church. It is the church with many people in it and many faiths.
Mhm.
And in many ways, faiths will focus more on service and on acting as Jesus did, because you can't just run people out of town or shun them when there's 500,000 people there.
Going back to my early teens, living in Milwaukee, we were our little apartment was in the cordoned off zone during the riots, and so we were one of a handful of white folk in that little neighborhood watching the National Guard patrolling in front of our apartment building. I was fascinated by Father Grappi's courage. I remember thinking, dude, are you crazy? And he was, in such a beautiful way. And so what it did was it drove me to libraries to look up Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As a teen, I was instantly on fire, mentally, spiritually, instantly drawn in. And when I read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, I was in. I was all in. And then I found out that you can't do that in certain circles that I began to be known in and walked with. But I, again, being a contrarian, I said, no, I'm going there. I have to, because to be true to myself. Now, I'm going to tell one more little snippet of why I am who I am. In 1952, my mother attended an A.A. Allen tent meeting, one of the first integrated tent meetings in Texas. And she went forward for prayer to have a child. I was that child. So I grew up with that story that this is what she was about. And she was just a Native American girl running for her life. But A.A. Allen then kind of slid into my peripheral vision. And I looked him up, and then I saw these tent meetings integrate in the 50s, which was insane. Again, the courage alone. I mean, not the theology, but the courage of the practice just grabbed me, just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. grabbed my soul and my heart. And I've been an astute student thereof ever since. So I'm sorry, I don't want to slide that in for the point of history and to my personal history. So
Well, it's very Wisconsin.
yeah,
This is very Wisconsin. And when we think of that 60s civil rights movement, one of the centers of gravity, I should say two, were Milwaukee and Madison.
Oh, right.
And especially that ELCA church, but also the Quaker church here in Wisconsin. And there's this through line of Quakerism through anti-slavery all the way into the civil rights movement.
Right.
And nonviolence, in many ways, is based on that Sermon on the Mount. King's genius is to take Mahatma Gandhi's idea of nonviolence and to marry it to the Sermon on the Mount, make it Christian. But Quakers were already using nonviolence in 1942.
Yeah.
And it's Baynard Rustin who really teaches him how to do that. That's this David Garrow's famous article when King gave up his guns. So Baynard Rustin is the one who talks about what does it mean to be Christ. And Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Madison, Milwaukee, New York, SUNY New York, UCLA. Those are the big universities that sent the students for Freedom Summer, that sent people for Selma.
Yes.
And but the thing that links the Quakers, the ELCA Lutherans, that links and the spiritualist Christians, the Jews, and the atheists together was this idea that if someone is not free, I am not free. And that's very much an idea you see in the Beatitudes, that it's the whatsoever you do to the least of my brethren, that you do unto me. And that's where we get that church remnant. Because my mom always used to say to me, if my faith is so weak, it can't be exposed to other things, it's not really a faith.
Say that again. That is so important. One more time.
If my faith is so weak, it can't be exposed to other things.
Yes.
It's not really a faith.
Yes.
When my dad died, my father was an AME. African Methodist Episcopal.
Right,
Now they're a
right.
part of United Methodist.
Yep.
Married to a Roman Catholic, lifelong, hardcore Irish Catholic.
Oh, my,
real
my.
Roman Catholic. I have none.
Oh, wow.
I have a couple of priests in
Oh.
the family. I was married by a Black Catholic.
Beautiful.
Embarrassing story on the altar about me.
Beautiful.
To a Baptist, to NBC National, because the Southern Baptist and the National Baptist Coalition are still.
Okay.
And while the SBC did allow some Black churches in, it's still segregated by church.
Mm-hmm.
Luter, who was the first Black president, is actually my mom's co-worker's son. So I knew those people. But they had an impossible time trying to
No doubt.
integrate it by
No doubt.
pew.
No doubt.
In places like here, the Catholic Church is integrated by pew.
Mhm.
But in places like Milwaukee and DC, it's integrated by church. And that is a part of that church remnant. Because as a Black Catholic, I've here on this campus, I've been told I wasn't Christian by someone. I also had someone ask me, "You're a thinking person. You have a PhD. You are a National Merit Scholar. How can you believe in religion? How can you have faith?" So I have always had a faith that was challenged. I still remember being in public school. I was at an all-Black magnet in 1981. We like to think segregation ended in
Oh,
64.
no.
It did not.
No.
And when my father died, I was 14, and one of the teachers, who was Baptist, said to me, a Black teacher, "It's unfortunate your father is going to hell, but you can still be saved." Now, I did not need to hear that. That was not a great moment.
No, I'm sure.
But it goes back to, how do you defend your faith in a difficult time?
Oh, mercy.
And she thought she was doing me a favor because for her group, which tended to segregate itself,
Mm-hmm.
didn't have much experience with whites, didn't have much experience outside. Just to make sure you accept the name of God was important. You didn't have to do anything back past that. You're in. The rest of it was cultural. The rest of it is performative in some ways to be in group, to listen to the emerging Christian music there, et cetera. But for me, it was an identity. And I think it's still an identity. To be Catholic is an identity for many people.
Right.
And there's this hubris of certainty that the church regnant gets to have because there's not a lot of people who will challenge it, as opposed to the church remnant who faces challenges all the time. And I wanted to ask you about that hubris and how you see that operate.
Oh, mercy.
This hubris of certainty that you're insignificant human who is not the mirror image of God, but you're only a reflection. And the reflections are always distorted. Like
Yeah.
there's a bunch of artwork that's called primitive, where the people have no faces, but you can see the bodies.
Right.
That, in many ways, is what we are. And given that, can we be certain we are right, that we are interpreting God's will correctly, given that it's mistranslated from Aramaic
Right.
by people with agendas, intellect, and then you got the King James one, which was translated by vengeful priests
Yes.
who were angry that King James was gay, but were also angry that Elizabeth I had stopped mandating jail time, not going to church. 'Cause that's why you couldn't get rid of her. She was the one who said, nope, nope, nope. If you don't go to church, you no longer have to pay a fine on Sunday morning,
Yeah.
and you no longer go to jail. So of course she was popular, but the ministers, whether they we're from the Anglican Church or from the Catholic, we're like, wait, we don't get a guaranteed tithe anymore?
See, these are the adult conversations that I've been talking about. The BS issue, the bait and switch. We bait you in because we say, oh, God loves you. And then when you come in the doors, we say, and by the way, you're born broken. You're
Yes.
born cursed. And then we start salving you with our quote unquote good news, but it's not really good news because it's all about the afterlife and not about this life, which the Sermon on the Mount is about this life and how we navigate everything you're talking about, So for me, my journey has been like, I feel like I've been a guy in a 2-man canoe and there's 14 people in the canoe. And I'm just trying to keep this thing from tipping, but I'm seeking to navigate adult conversations with folks. And I've been high and I've been low about thinking, okay, good, we're having the conversation. We're talking about race. We're talking about patriarchy. We're talking about the nastiness of born broken, born cursed, all of that. We're going to talk about it so we can get to some better answers. Not that you're right, I'm wrong, shut up, sit down and listen to me. No, let's have a conversation. And I've been after that conversation in so many ways until finally, now at 71, I've said, wait, I'm pretty convinced now that I'm conversation room. That myself leave a legacy. I'm not about to die, but I can see it from here. So when I'm gone, I want people to say, oh, he might have been on to something.
Thanks for listening to the No BS Bishop podcast. If you like the show, leave a comment on it. Or, even better, share it with your friends. And we'll see you on the next one.